Thank you so much to our amazing subscribers for helping us reach 100 subscribers. We truly appreciate every single one of you for your support and kindness. Please keep supporting us as we share stories that remind us how fragile life can be and how important it is to care for one another. Today, we have a very important case to share. A terrible event that happened on April 15, 2023. It involves a young woman named Kaylin Gillis, who was only 20 years old, and how one small mistake changed everything. Have you ever thought about how a simple wrong turn can change your whole life in the blink of an eye? That is exactly what happened on that cool April evening when Kaylin and her friends set out in a car to find another friend's house. The sun had gone down, and the moonlit sky was dotted with stars, shining gently over the quiet roads of Hebron, New York. Everything seemed so peaceful. The car was driven by Kaylin's boyfriend, who had been trying his best to navigate the winding roads under the dim glow of the streetlights. Sometimes, on a dark night, GPS signals can act up, and addresses can be hard to see. Without meaning any harm, they turned into a driveway they believed was the right one, but it was not. Now, in another life, this might have been a moment that caused a little embarrassment or a quick laugh. Maybe Kaylin and her friends would have joked about how tricky country roads can be at night. They would have backed out of the driveway, turned the car around, and been on their way to their friend's place with a funny story to share the next day. But on this night, fate took a terrible twist. The property belonged to a man named Kevin, a sour and tense figure who lived on a ridgetop in that rural town. He was known for being easily angered and not very welcoming to strangers. Instead of coming out to see if they needed help, Kevin took out a 20-gauge shotgun and fired 2 shots at the vehicle. It all happened so fast that Kaylin and her friends hardly knew what was going on. One moment, they were backing out, apologizing among themselves for the confusion. The next moment, they heard the deafening blasts of gunfire. The loud pop echoed through the quiet night, and at first, none of them could quite understand what was happening. Fear spread like a cold wave inside the car as they realized that real bullets had been fired in their direction. The second shot tore into the air and struck Kaylin in the neck. There are moments in life that break your heart instantly, leaving you breathless and filled with horror. This was one of those moments. Kaylin's friends screamed and panicked, the driver hitting the gas pedal to speed away, hoping to reach somewhere safe. Their minds were racing with questions. Why would anyone shoot at them for simply being in the wrong driveway? How badly was Kaylin hurt? And what could they do to save her? With the adrenaline coursing through their veins, they realized they had no cell phone reception in that remote stretch of Hebron. The darkness felt even heavier as they sped away, trying to stay calm enough to figure out what to do next. Eventually, they reached the nearby town of Salem, where they could finally call 911. Their voices shook as they spoke to the operator, describing the terrifying turn of events. Kaylin was gravely wounded, bleeding, and losing consciousness. They begged for help, but by the time paramedics arrived, Kaylin's injuries were too severe. The bullet wound in her neck had taken her life before any medical team could save her. The news of Kaylin's tragic death spread through the community like a shockwave. People talked about it in hushed tones in the local diner and at the gas station. Kaylin, born on February 23, 2003, was a bright young woman, a 2021 graduate of Schuylerville High School. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was kind, caring, and had big dreams for the future. Now, those dreams would never come true. Friends and neighbors gathered to console her grieving family, bringing food, flowers, and heartfelt sympathy. They were all trying to understand how one tiny mistake, turning into the wrong driveway, could lead to such a devastating outcome. Meanwhile, the police arrived at Kevin's home, where they found a tense situation. Kevin did not want to surrender. He claimed that he had been in bed since 8:30 p.m., suggesting that hunters might have been the ones who fired shots. But his words did not match the evidence. For nearly an hour, there was a standoff as Kevin stayed inside his home, talking on the phone with a police dispatcher and his lawyer. Eventually, he gave himself up. The police brought him into custody, noting that he had no prior criminal record in New York, but had once been arrested in Vermont for a weapon-related assault charge that was later dismissed. 8 body-worn cameras recorded the entire encounter, capturing Kevin's every word and action. Officers later described him as cold and uncooperative, showing little concern for the life that had just been taken. The community, upon hearing this, felt a deep sense of anger and sadness. This man had shot into a car without warning, hitting an innocent young woman in the neck, and he did not even seem remorseful. Kevin was quickly moved from the Washington County Correctional Facility, where Kaylin's father worked as a corrections officer, to the Warren County Jail in Lake George. This decision was made to avoid any conflict or difficulties, considering Kaylin's father's job and the high emotions surrounding the case. In his arraignment on April 16, 2023, Kevin pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder. The judge, however, denied bail, worried that Kevin, who had a reputation for being confrontational and hot-tempered, might pose a danger if he was allowed to go free before the trial. Over the following days and weeks, more details emerged about the night of the shooting. According to court papers, Kevin had told the police a story that did not make sense. He tried to avoid blame by coming up with excuses and false timelines. Yet the facts were clear. Kaylin's car was leaving his property when he decided to open fire. He had acted in a reckless way, not caring about the precious lives that were at risk in that moment. This case soon became linked in people's minds with 2 other shocking shootings that happened around the same time in other parts of the country. Ralph, a teenager in Kansas City, Missouri, was shot after accidentally ringing the wrong doorbell. And 2 cheerleaders in Elgin, Texas, were shot after getting into the wrong car. These similar stories made people question how such small mistakes could lead to life-threatening violence. It also led many to have deep conversations about fear, firearms, and the quickness with which some people resort to violence. While Kaylin's family began the hard process of planning her funeral and dealing with their grief, Kevin's legal troubles continued to grow. By May 2023, he faced not only the second-degree murder charge, but also counts of reckless endangerment and tampering with evidence. The legal term for the murder charge was changed from intentional murder to reckless depraved indifference murder, meaning that while Kevin might not have planned to kill Kaylin, his actions showed a complete disregard for human life. Jury selection for his trial was set for September 2023, but legal delays pushed it back to October 30th. Then, just days before that date, the judge granted the defense more time to investigate certain pieces of evidence, and the trial was postponed again until January 8, 2024. For Kaylin's family, every delay felt like more salt in a wound that refused to heal. They wanted justice, and they wanted closure, but the slow wheels of the legal system kept them waiting. Finally, in January 2024, the trial began in earnest. The courtroom was packed with people who wanted to see justice done. Some were reporters, hoping to share the story with the world, while others were neighbors or friends who still could not believe what had happened on that quiet April night. Witnesses took the stand one after another, sharing their versions of the story. Kaylin's boyfriend, who had been driving the car, spoke through tears about how quickly everything happened and how helpless he felt when Kaylin was struck. The others in the car also described the horror of seeing their friend wounded and the frantic race to find cell phone reception to call for help. Experts in firearms and forensics explained how the shotgun pellets traveled, how they matched the weapon found at Kevin's house, and how the trajectory showed that the group was leaving at the time of the shooting. The prosecution painted a clear picture of Kevin as a man ready to use lethal force without a second thought, a person so stubborn and anger-filled that he chose to shoot rather than ask questions. Kevin's defense team tried to argue that he felt threatened by the unknown vehicles entering his driveway late at night. They claimed he had the right to protect his property. But many people saw this as a weak excuse, pointing out that the cars were leaving and no one had tried to break in or threaten him. Kaylin and her friends had been polite teenagers, not intruders. The defense could not explain why Kevin fired not one but 2 shots, nor could they show any real sign that Kevin was in danger. The jury listened to all the evidence. Day after day, they sat in the courtroom, watching each witness recount the events, seeing the sorrow on Kaylin's family's faces, and feeling the weight of the tragedy. By January 23, 2024, they were ready to give their verdict. Kevin was found guilty of second-degree murder. It was a solemn moment in the courtroom, with relief for Kaylin's loved ones that justice had been served, but also deep sadness that nothing could bring her back. On March 1, 2024, the judge handed down the sentence. Kevin received 25 years to life in prison, plus a consecutive sentence of 21 months to 4 years for his other crimes. This meant that Kevin, now an older man, would likely spend the rest of his days behind bars. Even though this punishment would not undo what happened, it served as a statement that taking a life so recklessly would not be tolerated. Soon after, on March 14, 2024, Kevin was moved to Elmira Correctional Facility in Elmira, New York, and then transferred to Wendy Correctional Facility. That is where he remains to this day. Meanwhile, Kaylin's family began the long journey of living without their daughter. They had to face each morning with the cold truth that she was gone. The memory of her laughter and big dreams still hovered in every room of their home. The emptiness they felt seemed impossible to fill, but they did their best to celebrate her life and keep her spirit alive. As the months turned into years, the story of Kaylin Gillis stayed in the hearts of those who heard it. In simple, clear language that even a child could understand, people told the story of a young woman who lost her life simply because she and her friends turned around in the wrong driveway. They spoke about how everything can change in the blink of an eye, and how we must hold on to kindness, caution, and respect for one another. Some changes began to take place in the community. People started being more careful with strangers, but also kinder in their approach. Many thought about how fear can make someone do terrible things, and they worked to make sure that others would not react with violence in scary or uncertain moments. Town meetings were held to discuss safety measures, like better lighting on rural roads and clearer house numbers, so that no one else would end up in the wrong driveway by accident. Some neighbors also began checking in on one another more often, reaching out to those who seemed withdrawn or angry, hoping to prevent future tragedies. The sorrowful event also served as a reminder of the power of firearms and the responsibility that comes with them. While people had different opinions on gun ownership, most agreed that firing a weapon should never be taken lightly. Many in the community felt that if Kevin had taken just one moment to think, to wonder who was in the car, or to notice that they were leaving, Kaylin might still be alive. Kaylin's memory inspired some folks to set up scholarships or small funds in her name to help other young people pursuing their dreams. The community came together in her honor, making sure that her life, full of potential and kindness, would not be forgotten. At candlelight vigils, they shared stories about her bright smile and the many ways she brought happiness to those around her. They prayed for healing for her family and for everyone who loved her. Across the country, as people heard about Kaylin's story and the other tragedies that happened during that same week, discussions about community safety and misunderstandings began to grow. How could someone accidentally getting into the wrong car, or ringing the wrong doorbell, or turning into the wrong driveway lead to such violence? These conversations, though tough, were important. People recognized that fear can make us do dangerous things, but empathy and understanding can help us hold back our worst impulses. For Kaylin's parents, every day was a struggle at first. They remembered the times she would sit at the kitchen table, laughing and texting her friends, the times she would fall asleep on the couch while watching movies, and the plans she had for the future. They held onto each memory as a treasure, determined not to let their daughter's story fade away. Each holiday without her, each birthday, brought back the pain of loss, but also the warmth of remembering who she was. Her father, who worked at the correctional facility, found himself in an unimaginable position, connected to the place where Kevin, the man who ended his daughter's life, had stayed before he was moved to another jail. The father bore that burden with quiet strength, knowing that the memory of Kaylin was far stronger than any anger he might feel. He channeled his grief into helping others, showing empathy to those around him, and trying in his own way to prevent future acts of violence. As the seasons changed, people talked less about the event in daily conversation, but it never left the hearts and minds of those who lived it or learned from it. The tragedy became a story that parents told their children, warning them about life's uncertainty, but also teaching them about caring for others and showing caution in all their actions. School teachers would sometimes mention Kaylin when talking about decisions and consequences, explaining that the simplest action can have a big impact on someone else's life. In the quiet, rural areas where Kaylin had spent her youth, life continued on as it often does after tragedy. People tilled the land, planted crops, harvested them, and children played in the yards after school. But now and then, especially on cool, moonlit nights, someone would remember the shot that rang out and the life it took. That memory was like a whisper in the wind, telling everyone to be gentle with each other, to think twice, and to cherish every heartbeat. The trial and conviction of Kevin was a clear example of justice being served, but many wondered if it could ever really be enough. Kaylin's family had lost a daughter, sister, and friend, and no amount of prison time for Kevin would bring her back. Still, people found some comfort in knowing that the man who took her life would be held accountable. They saw it as a statement that life is precious, and you cannot just open fire on someone because of your own anger or fear. Over time, Kaylin's story was joined by others. Stories of second chances, stories of forgiveness, and stories of building a safer community. Some families dedicated themselves to fighting for better awareness around violence, creating local groups where people could talk about their concerns and learn about responsible problem solving. Others found hope in each other, building networks of neighbors who kept an eye out for signs of trouble. The memory of Kaylin's tragic end guided them, reminding them that you never know how one small action can turn the world upside down. For Kaylin's friends, the night of April 15, 2023, was etched in their minds. It was the night they lost a dear friend, someone who could light up a room with her presence. Some of them experienced nightmares or found it hard to drive at night, remembering the shotgun blast and the terror of trying to escape. But as time passed, they leaned on each other for support, sharing memories of Kaylin's warmth and using her spirit to fuel their own acts of kindness. Many decided to live in a way that honored her, by being more patient with others, by extending help to strangers in need, and by cherishing the moments they had with loved ones. The place where it all happened, Kevin's driveway, became something of a landmark, but not in a good way. Locals who had once passed it by without a second thought now felt a chill whenever they glanced in its direction. Some avoided it altogether, not wanting to relive the memory. Others occasionally slowed down to reflect on how such a normal piece of land could be the site of such a heartbreaking event. It stood as a silent reminder that tragedy can strike anywhere, at any time. Police and first responders, who had answered the call that night, also carried the weight of what happened. Many had seen accidents, fires, and crimes, but something about this senseless act struck them deeply. They too asked themselves if anything could have been done differently, if there was a way to reach Kevin sooner, or if there was some sign that he would act so violently. Their job was to keep people safe, yet they arrived to find Kaylin already gone, her young life cut short. It was a burden on their hearts, one that reminded them how urgent every call can be. Across social media, people shared their grief and outrage. Strangers posted messages of support for Kaylin's family, sending virtual hugs and prayers from across the nation. Many were stunned that such a friendly and smiling young woman could be killed for something as simple as a driveway mix-up. Others connected Kaylin's story to the other shootings that week, expressing dismay at how often a tiny mistake could lead to bullets and bloodshed. In chats and online groups, discussions brewed about fear, property rights, and the line between self-defense and murder. In the end, though, Kaylin's story was not just about violence. It was about a community coming together to grieve and to learn. People who had never met before found themselves hugging, crying, and supporting each other in candlelight vigils. They vowed to watch out for their neighbors, to be more patient when someone makes a wrong turn, and to teach their kids that life is precious. They wanted to believe that from this terrible incident, some measure of good could blossom, if only in the way people treated each other from now on. Kevin's trial ended with a powerful message. If you recklessly take a life, you must face the consequences. He was found guilty of second-degree murder, a serious charge that reflects how his disregard for life led to Kaylin's death. The judge's sentence was meant to protect the community and remind everyone that reckless violence must not be allowed to thrive. Yet Kevin's punishment could never restore what was lost. Kaylin's spirit would forever remain a young, bright memory in the hearts of those who loved her, while her future was stolen away in a burst of gunfire. Even though Kevin had insisted he was in bed at the time and tried to point fingers at hunters, the evidence was stacked against him. The bullet that ended Kaylin's life came from his shotgun, and body-worn camera footage showed him refusing to surrender at first, spinning tales that could not hold water. In the courtroom, he faced the consequences of his rash act. The families, the jury, and the community all saw, firsthand, how a moment of anger could spiral into something far worse than Kevin likely ever imagined. By the time Kevin was moved to prison, the news cameras had packed up and gone, and the daily headlines had moved on to other stories. But the families involved would never forget. Kevin had all the time in the world now to reflect on his decision that night, the trigger he pulled, and the young life he ended. Meanwhile, Kaylin's friends and family tried to find ways to move forward without her. They remembered her laugh, her ambitions, the little quirks that made her who she was. They placed flowers and gifts on her grave, spoke to her in their quiet moments, and carried her memory into each new day. On warm summer evenings, some of Kaylin's closest friends would gather under a big oak tree near the local park to talk about life. They remembered Kaylin's jokes, the way she smiled, and the times they spent giggling over silly things. At first, they cried often, wishing she could be there with them, but slowly, they found ways to celebrate her life instead of only mourning her death. They began to plan small memorial events, like a casual walk through the community in her honor, or a scholarship fundraiser for graduating seniors. In doing these things, they kept her spirit alive. The townspeople of Hebron also realized that they needed better resources for dealing with conflict. Some suggested community training programs on de-escalation and stress management. Others proposed that the local government install clearer signs and better lighting so that travelers would be less likely to take a wrong turn. While nothing could guarantee that another tragedy would not happen, each small change was a way to show that they cared and that they wanted to prevent any such horror from happening again. The rest of the world, reading or hearing about Kaylin's story, learned that tragedies can occur in the most ordinary moments. Something as small as entering the wrong driveway might seem harmless, but in a world where fear and anger can simmer just beneath the surface, it can become something deadly. Kaylin's story served as a warning to stay vigilant, to respect the power of firearms, and to treat people with care. It also reminded everyone that life is short and uncertain, so we should love our families and friends with all our hearts. The final chapter of this story was not about the sentencing or the prison walls that now contained Kevin. It was about the love and unity that grew out of grief. Kaylin's family, though heartbroken, found solace in each other and in the kindness of strangers who reached out with prayers and support. Her friends discovered ways to channel their pain into something meaningful, turning sorrow into compassion for those around them. The memory of Kaylin's bright spirit became a silent nudge, urging people to be kinder, to hold back anger, and to offer help instead of harm. Even as months turned to years, that April night remained frozen in time, a reminder of how quickly everything can change. Some nights, as a soft breeze rustled through the trees, Kaylin's mother might sit on the porch and remember her daughter's laugh echoing across the yard. She would close her eyes and whisper a silent prayer that her girl had found peace, and she would hold on to hope that the world, having seen what happened, might become a little gentler, a little less likely to greet mistakes with violence. Thank you all once again for being here to share this story and for helping our channel reach 100 subscribers. We hope you keep supporting us as we continue to tell stories that need to be told. Stories of heartbreak, of hope, and of the lessons we can learn from the moments that change our lives forever. Every day is a gift, and every choice we make can lead us down a path we never expected. Let us all try to remember Kaylin's story and choose a path filled with care, understanding, and the warmth that comes from looking out for one another. May her memory guide us toward kindness, reminding us that every person we meet has a life as precious as our own, and every time we feel anger or fear, we have a chance to pause, reflect, and choose empathy. If just one person takes a moment to breathe and listen before acting, Kaylin's story will have made the world a bit brighter. So let us hold our loved ones tight, cherish every laughter-filled moment, and carry on with open hearts. Let us be a beacon of light for those who feel lost in the darkness of their own anxieties. If we can do this, then maybe, just maybe, we can keep another wrong turn from turning into a tragedy, and we can honor the life of a young woman who will forever remain in our thoughts as a reminder to be gentle with one another, no matter how dark the night may seem. Even when time moves on and new stories fill our headlines, let us not forget Kaylin's story. Let us remember that we have the power to shape a kinder world, where we greet each other with patience instead of suspicion. Let us think of Kevin, locked away in a cold cell, with nothing but his regrets, as a warning of what happens when anger and fear rule over reason. Above all, let us never forget the bright future Kaylin lost, the milestones she would have reached, the friendships she would have deepened, the love and laughter she would have shared. In telling her story, in keeping her memory close, we remind ourselves that one tiny act of compassion can stand between hope and heartbreak. So here is to Kaylin, to her family and friends, and to everyone who came together to mourn and to learn. Here is to all of you who listened, who read, and who have chosen to carry her memory forward. Let every moment we spend on this earth be a testament to the power of peace and kindness, and let us vow never to let a single wrong turn destroy the light that lives in each and every one of us.